She was my dance instructor, until one close step changed everything. The first day I walked into the dance studio, I felt a mixture of excitement and self-consciousness I hadn't expected. The polished wooden floor reflected the soft glow of overhead lights, and the faint scent of linoleum cleaner mixed with the warmth of the room made it feel strangely welcoming. I had signed up for the class on a whim, partly to challenge myself, partly to shake off the monotony of my routine, but the nervousness knotting my stomach reminded me I was out of my comfort zone. Then I saw her, my dance instructor. She moved with a quiet authority that immediately drew attention, but there was a gentleness in the way she guided her students. Her hair was pulled back in a loose bun, a few strands framing her face, and her posture carried the kind of graceful confidence that only comes with experience. I noticed the faintest hint of perfume, something soft, floral, yet warm, that lingered in the air whenever she passed. My chest tightened in a way I didn't fully understand. As I took my place among the other students, I tried to focus on the steps, but my gaze kept flicking back to her. She moved around the room, adjusting posture here, correcting a foot placement there, and each time her hands brushed a student's arm or shoulder, I felt the subtle electricity of touch, the quiet intimacy of her guidance. When she finally came to me, her fingers rested lightly on my shoulder, adjusting my stance. The contact was brief, professional, yet it lingered in my senses, the warmth of her touch, the steadiness in her hands. I could feel my heartbeat quicken. She demonstrated a simple movement, her body flowing with the music, and I tried to mirror her, feeling acutely aware of every motion. My clumsiness made me embarrassed, yet she smiled, her eyes warm and encouraging. "Relax your shoulders," she said softly, her voice low and calm, like a melody that blended with the background music. As she reached out again to correct my posture, our hands touched for just a moment longer than necessary, and I felt an odd thrill at the contact. There was a steadiness in her touch, a silent reassurance, and it was intoxicating in the gentlest way. I couldn't shake the feeling that this class, meant to be about rhythm and movement, had suddenly become something more, something personal. Each glance, each fleeting touch, seemed to carry an unspoken weight, a quiet invitation to notice her more closely than I probably should. My mind raced with questions I didn't dare speak aloud. Was this attraction imagined? Was it wrong to feel it? Yet, I couldn't help but watch her as she guided the class, every movement of hers drawing me in. By the end of the session, as I wiped sweat from my brow and tried to compose myself, I realized something had shifted. This wasn't just a class. It was the start of an experience I didn't yet understand, one where every small touch, every guiding hand, and every fleeting glance would linger far longer than the music. By the second week, my nervousness had eased slightly, replaced by a quiet anticipation each time I walked into the studio. I arrived early, the polished floor gleaming under the soft, golden light that spilled through the tall windows. Other students were scattered around the room, practicing steps or chatting in low voices, but my attention kept drifting toward her, my instructor, poised and elegant, moving with a fluidity I found hypnotic. Today, she paired me with her for a short practice drill. My stomach tightened, a mix of excitement and dread, as she approached. "Let's try a simple sequence together," she said, her voice low and calm, carrying the subtle warmth that had begun to feel like an anchor to my nerves. As she extended her hand toward me, I felt a shiver run through me at the contact. Her fingers were gentle but certain, guiding mine into the right position, and I became acutely aware of the small warmth radiating from her touch. We moved together across the floor, and with each step, I felt the subtle intimacy of proximity. Her hand rested lightly on my shoulder for balance, her body close enough that I could sense her rhythm as if it were syncing with my own. Every so often, our knees brushed, sending a small, electric thrill up my leg. It was almost unbearable, yet I reminded myself this was just dancing, just guidance. Still, there was something in the way her eyes held mine during a step, a patient intensity that made me feel both seen and understood in a way I hadn't expected. When I stumbled slightly over a tricky movement, she didn't correct me immediately. Instead, she let her hand linger on my back for an extra beat, as if letting me absorb her steadiness before guiding me forward. That small gesture, the warmth, the pressure, the quiet reassurance, sent my pulse racing. Her smile was soft, almost teasing, yet gentle enough that I felt a wave of calm alongside the excitement. It was a paradox I couldn't untangle. I was nervous, but utterly drawn to her, as if every movement we shared was building a silent connection. As the drill ended, she stepped back but left her hand brushing briefly against mine, a touch so fleeting yet so resonant that I couldn't stop thinking about it. I felt the subtle imprint of her fingers, a warmth that lingered long after she had moved away. Even when the next pair of students called for her attention, my gaze unconsciously followed her, noting the way her hair fell slightly over her shoulder, the quiet precision of her movements, the calm confidence she carried in every gesture. By the time class ended, I was aware of a quiet ache of longing, an unspoken desire to be closer, to linger in her presence, to let the rhythm of the music carry me into the warmth of her attention. I had come here to learn dance, but I realized that something else was unfolding, a connection, fragile and unspoken, forming in the spaces between touches, glances, and shared movement. And even though I wasn't sure what it meant, or if I should feel it at all, I knew I wanted it to continue, step by careful step. That day, the class seemed to pass more quickly than usual, the music blending seamlessly with the rhythm of our movements. As the final notes faded, most of the students hurried out, eager to escape the early evening chill. I stayed behind, lingering under the pretense of tying my shoes, but really because I couldn't bring myself to leave her presence just yet. She noticed and smiled, small, knowing, yet gentle. "You're staying after again," she said, her voice carrying the same calm warmth that had already begun to feel like a quiet tether to me. I felt my cheeks heat up, but there was something in the way she looked at me, patient, unhurried, genuinely interested, that made me want to stay. We began talking, first about something trivial, music, rhythm, the peculiar challenges of the steps we had just practiced. But soon, the conversation deepened, flowing into stories about childhood memories, favorite songs, even subtle confessions about our respective lives outside the studio. She leaned casually against the bar, her posture relaxed but poised, and I found myself drawn to the quiet strength in the way she carried herself. At one point, her knee brushed against mine as she shifted to demonstrate a step, and I felt a small jolt of awareness, a mix of surprise, warmth, and an electric thrill. It was fleeting, almost imperceptible, yet impossible to ignore. My hands unconsciously fidgeted, but she didn't pull away. Instead, she smiled lightly, the corners of her lips lifting in a way that suggested she knew the effect she had on me. I noticed the subtleties, the slight tilt of her head when she listened, the soft cadence of her voice when she laughed, the way her fingers brushed mine to emphasize a point. It wasn't bold or deliberate, just a natural intimacy that seemed to seep into the space between us. I realized I was hyper-aware of every detail, the warmth radiating from her hands, the quiet steadiness of her breathing, the faint scent of her perfume that clung to the air like a soft echo of her presence. There was a moment when we both paused, laughing at something silly I had said. Our eyes met, and I felt a curious mixture of embarrassment and longing. The laughter faded into a comfortable silence, and I realized just how aware I was of her, of the small gestures, the subtle touches, the ease with which she made me feel seen. Her hand brushed against mine once more, brief but meaningful, and I felt a warmth spread through my chest. When I finally left the studio, I walked into the cool evening air with a head full of thoughts I could hardly organize. Every step I took seemed to echo the rhythm we had shared, every small memory of her touch lingering like a soft hum. The attraction wasn't loud or overwhelming. It was quiet, persistent, and entirely consuming. I realized that our connection wasn't just about dance. It was about the way she made me feel, the unspoken understanding, the trust that was beginning to build with every shared glance, every fleeting brush of her hand. I left knowing I wanted more time, more closeness, more of whatever this was that had quietly begun between us. And for the first time, I allowed myself to imagine what it might feel like to step closer, even if only figuratively, into her world. A few days later, I found myself nervously texting her to ask about a private lesson. My fingers hovered over the keys, hesitant, aware of the unspoken line between teacher and student. When she replied, her tone calm and slightly teasing. Asterisk. I suppose I can make time for you. Asterisk, my chest tightened. That single, casual sentence carried a warmth I couldn't ignore. The studio was quiet that afternoon, the soft hum of the air conditioning and the faint echo of the city outside the tall windows the only sounds accompanying our movements. Being alone with her made the space feel both intimate and charged with an unspoken tension I hadn't fully recognized before. She greeted me with a smile that seemed to acknowledge our shared awareness, yet she remained composed, poised, the embodiment of quiet confidence. As the lesson began, I felt every step more acutely than before. Her hand rested lightly on my back as she guided me through the first sequence, the warmth of her touch steadying yet electrifying. Every subtle movement, her fingers brushing against my shoulder to correct a stance, her palm gliding over my wrist to adjust my hand placement, made my pulse accelerate. It was professional, necessary for the lesson, yet there was an intimacy in it I couldn't ignore. She moved beside me, her presence close enough that I could sense her rhythm, her breath brushing the edge of my ear as she whispered instructions. The faint scent of her perfume mixed with the warmth of her skin, and I realized I was acutely aware of her in a way that went far beyond mere instruction. Each step felt like a negotiation between desire and propriety, a delicate balance of professional guidance and unspoken attraction. At one point, she gently adjusted my posture, her hands lingering a beat longer than necessary, and I felt a shiver run through me. Her eyes met mine in a brief, steady gaze that said nothing overtly, yet spoke volumes in the silence between words. "Good," she murmured, her voice low and even, and I felt it resonate inside me, as if the music itself had found its way into my heartbeat. As the lesson continued, our movements began to sync in a way that felt natural, unforced. Every touch, every slight alignment of our bodies, carried weight and meaning. I noticed how her fingers lightly traced the edge of my shoulder when repositioning my arm, how her proximity created a warmth that seemed to pulse with every note of the music. My awareness of her was total. Every breath, every gesture, every fleeting glance magnified, and I found myself craving the rhythm of her presence as much as the steps themselves. By the end of the lesson, I was flushed, both from the exertion and from the quiet intimacy that had grown between us. She stepped back, but our hands brushed lightly as I prepared to leave, a fleeting contact that lingered in my senses long after. I walked out into the evening air feeling a strange mix of exhilaration and longing. The private lesson had done more than teach me dance. It had deepened a connection that was quiet yet undeniable, professional yet intimate, leaving me acutely aware that this was only the beginning. The studio felt different that evening, quieter, almost intimate, as if it too had recognized the tension simmering between us. The class was over, the other students gone, leaving just the two of us in the soft golden light filtering through the tall windows. The music she chose for the final piece was slow, deliberate, a melody that seemed to stretch the space between each note and each heartbeat. She approached me, her eyes meeting mine with that calm intensity one had already come to notice. Without a word, she extended her hand, and I took it, feeling the warmth of her fingers as they intertwined with mine. The touch was electric, but comforting, a paradox that made my chest tighten in ways I couldn't control. The small contact sent a ripple of anticipation through me, a prelude to what was about to unfold. As we began to move, she pulled me closer, not abruptly, but in a way that felt entirely natural. Her hands rested lightly on my shoulders, her body aligning with mine. I could feel her heartbeat, subtle but steady, against my chest. Every step was deliberate, every motion fluid, as if we were not just dancing to the music, but moving in sync with something unspoken, something shared between us alone. Her whisper broke the quiet rhythm, soft and intimate. "Don't stop." The words were simple, yet they carried weight, a subtle acknowledgement of the connection we had been building over weeks. I felt my face flush, my attention narrowing to the warmth of her hands, the light pressure of her body close to mine, the faint brush of her hair as it occasionally grazed my cheek. It was as if the world had contracted to this single moment, this delicate dance of closeness and trust. Every subtle movement carried meaning. Her fingers pressed lightly against my back, guiding me through the steps, yet it felt like more than instruction. I noticed the quiet steadiness in the way she held me, the way she let her eyes linger on mine, the soft rise and fall of her breath. Even as the music continued, time seemed to slow, stretching each sensation, each fleeting touch, into something almost tangible. There was no rush, no urgency, only the slow crescendo of awareness, of intimacy building with every shared motion. When our knees brushed or our hands adjusted in tandem, it wasn't just alignment. It was a conversation without words, an acknowledgement of the tension that had been growing quietly between us. I became aware of the warmth radiating from her body, the softness of her touch, the way her presence seemed to fill every corner of the room. By the time the song ended, we remained close, reluctant to break the connection that had grown so suddenly, yet so deeply. I felt a quiet ache of longing, mingled with exhilaration. That first dance had done more than move our bodies. It had moved something inside me, something I hadn't expected but couldn't deny. The studio, the music, her presence, it all coalesced into a moment that felt suspended, charged with possibility. The first real step toward a connection that was finally mutual, undeniable, and entirely alive. After that first slow dance, I couldn't shake the lingering warmth of her presence. My chest still throbbed from the closeness, my mind replaying the feel of her hands on my shoulders, the subtle brush of her hair, the quiet pulse of her heartbeat against mine. I lingered in the studio, unsure why I wasn't ready to leave, unsure if I even wanted to. She noticed, of course, and instead of leaving me alone, she settled herself on the floor by the bar, gesturing for me to join her. Sitting across from her, the polished wood cold beneath me, I felt the weight of everything I hadn't yet said. The music from earlier still hummed faintly in my ears, as if it had seeped into the walls and refused to leave. She looked at me, patient, her eyes warm but cautious. There was a subtle tension in the air, a mixture of unspoken desire and mutual awareness of the boundaries we hadn't yet crossed. I cleared my throat, unsure how to begin, but the words tumbled out anyway. I can't stop thinking about you, I admitted, my voice low, almost embarrassed. Not just the dancing, everything. The way you make me feel, the way you notice me. My hands fidgeted in my lap, and I caught the faintest smile tug at her lips. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she leaned slightly forward, brushing a loose strand of hair from her forehead. The motion was effortless, casual, but the touch of her fingers so close to my face made me acutely aware of her. You know, she said softly, her voice carrying a quiet hesitance. This isn't simple. There's the age difference, the teacher-student, the world outside this room. Her gaze searched mine, not with judgment, but with honest vulnerability. I nodded, swallowing the nervous lump in my throat. I know, I said quietly. I think about it too, but I can't ignore how I feel. And I think maybe you feel it too. My heart pounded, each beat echoing in the quiet space between us. Her response was slow, deliberate. She reached out, her hand brushing mine. Not forceful, just enough for our fingers to graze each other, warmth spreading through my chest. I do, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. But I've been hesitant, worried about the complications. Her eyes softened, and I felt the depth of her hesitation, the careful weighing of propriety against desire. Yet, even in that hesitation, there was a clear, undeniable spark of connection. We sat in silence for a few moments, the only sound the distant hum of the city beyond the windows. Every small gesture, her knee brushing mine, the light press of her fingertips, the quiet tilt of her head, spoke volumes. It was a moment of quiet surrender, a slow acknowledgement of the mutual feelings we'd been dancing around for weeks. When I finally rose to leave, I felt different, not lighter, exactly, but more grounded, more aware of the bond that had begun to form. The hesitation was still there, but so was possibility. And for the first time, I believed that what we were feeling wasn't just fleeting, it was real and worth exploring, step by careful step. The following week, I returned to the studio with a sense of anticipation I hadn't felt before. The space, once intimidating, now felt familiar, almost intimate, as if it too had been waiting for us to cross the invisible line we'd skirted for weeks. She was already there, adjusting the music for the class, her posture poised but relaxed, the calm confidence I had come to admire radiating from her like warmth. When she saw me, a soft smile curved her lips, a mixture of amusement and understanding, as if she knew exactly what was on my mind before I even spoke. Our eyes met, and I felt a pulse of something electric yet comforting, the quiet acknowledgement of everything that had transpired between us. This time, there was no hesitation, no unspoken boundaries holding us back. The connection we had carefully nurtured was mutual, acknowledged, and safe. After class, she suggested we continue with a private dance. As soon as our hands met, I felt the same warmth as before, but now it carried a steadiness I hadn't yet experienced. There was no longer the tentative thrill of uncertainty. Instead, there was confidence, trust, and a profound sense of ease. Her hands guided me with subtle pressure, aligning my posture, brushing my wrist lightly. Touches that had become language, each one speaking volumes about our shared understanding. We moved in rhythm with the soft music, bodies close but careful, perfectly balanced. Her head tilted slightly, resting briefly against my shoulder, and I felt the gentle rise and fall of her breath, a steady heartbeat that echoed against my own. Every subtle contact, the graze of her fingers against mine, the warmth of her arm along my back, carried the weight of all our unspoken moments, all the glances, the fleeting touches, the laughter, and the confessions. As the song progressed, I noticed how natural it felt to be this close to her. The nervousness and hesitation that had once pulsed through me were replaced by a calm awareness, a quiet joy in the shared rhythm of our movements. Her eyes met mine often, holding them with a warmth that spoke of trust, intimacy, and gentle desire. The age gap, the worries, the unspoken complications, they no longer seemed insurmountable. What mattered was the present moment, the dance, the connection. When the music ended, we remained close, fingers still entwined, foreheads nearly touching. I felt a quiet contentment, a deep sense of gratitude that this delicate, slow-burn connection had transformed into something real and mutual. The world outside, the judgments, the uncertainties, felt distant and irrelevant. All that mattered was the warmth of her hand in mine, the steady rhythm of our hearts, the soft laughter we shared as we straightened and prepared to leave. Walking out of the studio together, I realized that this was more than just dance. It was trust, affection, and the beginning of a bond that could grow naturally, patiently, beautifully. The steps we had taken on the polished floor mirrored the steps we were now taking in life, slow, careful, and fully aware of one another. And in that realization, I felt a quiet, lasting happiness. For the first time, I understood that some connections, nurtured with patience and care, could be both profoundly grounding and quietly electrifying. And I couldn't wait to see where this dance would take us next.